It's fascinating how some really crucial global events follow these, well, ancient processes.
Hmm.
And with the recent passing of Pope Francis on April 21st, 2025, we're about to see one of the most compelling ones, the election of a new pope.
It really is unique, isn't it? The whole world watches.
Exactly. And you shared this incredibly detailed Wikipedia entry on papal conclaves, which honestly just opened up so many questions about how this actually works.
It's a deep topic, loads of history, very specific rules. It makes total sense to want to, unpack it properly.
Totally. It feels like watching history unfold, but with incredibly high stakes. So that's our mission for this deep dive, right? To go through that Wikipedia source you sent,
Yep.
pull out the key bits, maybe some surprising details, and just make sense of how the next leader of the Catholic Church gets chosen.
And there's a lot to cover. We should probably start way back with the very early days.
Okay.
Then look at how things evolved, the modern process, those famous rituals like the smoke signals.
Ah, yes, the fumata.
Exactly. And, what happens right after the choice is made.
Perfect. So let's start at the beginning. How did they even choose a pope? Way back in the early church, was it anything like it is now?
Oh, not really. In the first few centuries, choosing the Bishop of Rome, who we now call the Pope, was much more local.
Local how?
Well, it was similar to how other bishops were chosen then. Basically, agreement among the local clergy and the laity, the regular church members in Rome.
So the people had a say.
Yeah, definitely. Sometimes it was acclamation, like a spontaneous agreement on someone. There wasn't a strict rule book.
I can see how that might get complicated.
It did. The source mentions Pope Cornelius back in the 3rd century. Even then, they talked about, God's will, the church's agreement, bishops approving. It was a bit vague.
And that led to problems.
Sometimes, yeah, disagreements happened. You even had periods with rival popes, multiple people claiming to be the legitimate one because the process wasn't nailed down.
Rival popes. Okay, so when did things start getting more, well, organized? When did they try to fix that?
It was gradual. They tinkered with the role of the laity. Sometimes they could reject a candidate, sometimes not.
Right.
And the Holy Roman Emperor got involved too, wielding quite a bit of influence. Popes even had to swear loyalty oaths at one point.
Oaths to the emperor. Wow.
Yeah. But a really big moment, a key turning point, was 1059. Pope Nicholas II issued a decree.
What did it say?
It basically established the College of Cardinals as the only group allowed to elect the Pope.
Ah, okay. So that's when the cardinals became central to this, the group we hear about today.
Exactly. That decree really focused the power, and then things got refined even more.
How so?
Well, in 1139, they removed the need for approval from lower clergy and the public.
Right.
And then in 1179, the Third Lateran Council gave all cardinals equal voting rights. So it became very much an internal election within that specific group.
It sounds like they were trying to make it clearer, maybe less open to outside meddling.
That seems to be the direction, yeah. But the source also points out that even with these changes, some papal elections went on for ages. Months, sometimes even years.
Years? Why would it take so long?
Well, several reasons. Sometimes the number of cardinals was tiny, like fewer than 10 people trying to decide.
Oh, wow.
Travel was tough back then, too. Just getting everyone together took time. But a huge factor was politics.
Politics. Inside the church.
Definitely. Powerful families, different factions backing their own guys, deadlocks were common. It wasn't always just about, spiritual consensus. There was real power playing going on.
Okay, that makes sense. So how did they try and deal with those crazy long delays?
That led to another major development. Pope Gregory X in 1274 issued a decree called Ubi Periculum.
Ubi Periculum, what did that do?
It basically mandated seclusion. The cardinals had to be locked in conclave with a key.
Literally locked in.
Literally, until they elected someone.
Yeah.
And he set strict rules, limited servants, reduced food rations if they took too long.
Cutting their food. That's intense. Did it work? Did it stop the long elections?
Well, it was supposed to. But the cardinals didn't exactly love it. The rules got suspended, then brought back, then suspended again. It shows that tension, right, between needing time to deliberate and needing a pope in place.
Definitely a balancing act. The entry also mentioned some other interesting historical bits.
Yeah.
Like lay people being cardinals.
Yeah, that's fascinating. Until 1899, you could have laymen, often nobles, sometimes monks who weren't priests in the College of Cardinals. They were expected to be celibate, though.
Huh. And that changed.
It did. In 1917, church law made it clear. All cardinals had to be priests. And later, generally bishops, though there can still be exceptions for older priests.
Okay. And what about who could actually be elected pope? Did that change too?
Oh, yeah. Way back, even laymen were technically eligible. St. Ambrose is a famous example, elected Bishop of Milan before he was even baptized.
No way.
Yeah. But over time, the rules tightened. Restrictions came and went, but the trend was towards electing someone already in the clergy. The last non-cardinal was Urban VI in 1378.
1378. That's a long time ago.
And the last non-priest was Leo X in 1513. So for centuries now, the Pope has come from within the ranks of the clergy, usually the cardinals.
Right. And the number of cardinals voting and their age limits, that's evolved quite a bit too, hasn't it?
Absolutely. Pope Sixtus V set a limit of 70 cardinals back in 1587, symbolic, like the 70 elders of Israel.
Okay.
But in the 20th century, Popes John XXIII and Paul VI really increased that number, mostly to get broader representation from around the world.
Makes sense for a global church.
Exactly. And then Paul VI brought in a really key rule in 1970. Cardinals over 80 can't vote.
The age limit.
Yes.
Yes.
John Paul II clarified it slightly. You have to be under 80 when the papacy becomes vacant. So if you turn 80 the day after the Pope dies, you still get to vote. If you turn 80 the day before, you don't.
Got it. And is there a maximum number of electors now?
Theoretically, it's around 120, set by Paul VI and confirmed by John Paul II. But popes sometimes exceed that number when appointing new cardinals.
Okay.
For this upcoming 2025 conclave, the source mentions there are 139 cardinals total, but 14 of them will be over 80, so they're ineligible to vote.
Leaving. A slightly smaller group actually casting ballots.
Right. Still a significant number, reflecting that global diversity.
And it's crucial to remember, like you said, the Pope is Bishop of Rome.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be Italian anymore.
Not at all. We've seen popes from Poland, Germany, Argentina recently. That really shows the universal nature of the church today. Though the rules do specify only Catholics can be elected.
Right, makes sense.
Based on a 1559 decree, non-Catholics or known heretics are excluded. And because of church teaching on ordination, women aren't eligible.
Okay. Now let's talk about the voting threshold. How many votes does someone need to actually win? Has that always been the same?
No, that's shifted too. Early on, the ideal was like everyone agrees, unanimity. Probably not always. So then a simple majority was discussed briefly. But the Third Lateran Council in 1179 set the standard that's largely held a two-thirds majority.
Two-thirds, okay.
There was also a rule for a long time against voting for yourself.
Oh, interesting. When did that change?
Pope Pius XII removed that ban in 1945. He also briefly upped the requirement to two-thirds plus one.
Huh. Why the plus one?
Possibly to ensure someone didn't win just by voting for themselves, if they were exactly on the two-thirds mark. But later, popes went back and forth a bit. John Paul II even allowed for a shift to an absolute majority after many, many ballots.
To break a deadlock.
Exactly. But Pope Benedict VI reversed that in 2007. He firmly reestablished the two-thirds majority as the requirement throughout the entire process.
So two-thirds it is. Seems pretty set now.
Mm-hmm.
And the Wikipedia article mentioned other ways of electing popes historically, besides just voting, like excessis.
Right. Those methods aren't used anymore. Excessis was a kind of second chance to vote. Cardinals could switch their vote to the leading candidate after the initial count, trying to get them over the line.
Sort of like bandwagoning.
A bit, yeah. That was stopped in the early 20th century. Then there was acclamation, or per inspirationem.
By inspiration.
Yeah, like a sudden, unanimous agreement as if inspired by the Holy Spirit. That was ruled out way back in 1621, and compromise was another one.
How did that work?
If the cardinals were totally deadlocked, they could agree to delegate the decision to a small committee chosen from among them. Last used in 1316, so a long time ago.
Okay.
And Pope John Paul II's 1996 Constitution, Universi Dominici Gregis, formally got rid of both acclamation and compromise. So now it's only election by secret ballot scrutiny.
It's the secret ballot. Okay. This historical context is crucial. Let's talk about another big historical factor. Outside influence, secular powers trying to control the election.
Oh, absolutely huge. For centuries, emperors, kings, powerful families, they all tried to influence who became pope.
How did they do that?
Roman emperors sometimes stepped in to settle disputed elections. Later, Ostrogothic kings, then Byzantine emperors, had to formally confirm the pope. That could cause massive delays.
Waiting for approval from Constantinople.
Exactly. Even after that ended, the Holy Roman emperors insisted elections happen with their ambassadors present. It was a constant struggle between church authority and secular power.
It sounds like the Pope wasn't always chosen independently.
Far from it, especially in certain periods. The 9th and 10th centuries are sometimes called the papacy's Dark Age, partly because Roman nobles had so much control. Powerful families just installed their own candidates.
Wow. So how did the church push back?
Well, that 759 decree by Nicholas II, besides setting up the cardinals, also framed the emperor's limited authority as something the papacy granted, not something the emperor inherently had.
Ah, clever framing.
And then the whole investiture controversy, that huge fight over who appoints bishops, ultimately led to the emperor's role being formally abolished in papal elections. That was settled in the Concordat of Worms in 1122, a massive step for church independence.
A major victory for the church then. But there was still that just exclusive thing, right? The veto power.
Yes, the right of exclusion.
Ooh.
Certain Catholic monarchs, Austria, France, Spain, mainly claimed the right to veto one candidate they didn't like.
How did they exercise that veto?
Usually through a cardinal loyal to their crown. They'd wait until a candidate looked like they were about to win. Then the crown cardinal would announce the veto.
Sneaky.
Very. There was sort of an unwritten rule, only one veto per country per conclave. The last time it was actually used was 1903. Austria vetoed Cardinal Rampolla.
1903. And what happened then?
The Pope elected after that veto, Pius VI, was furious. He issued a decree basically threatening automatic excommunication for anyone trying to deliver a government veto in the future.
And that was the end of it.
Pretty much. It slammed the door on that kind of direct political interference.
So with that outside influence gone, let's go back to those deadlocks. You mentioned Gregory X locking them in. Were there other extreme measures?
Oh, yeah. Sometimes local officials took matters into their own hands if things dragged on too long. Forced seclusion happened in Rome in 1241.
Right.
But the most famous story is probably Viterbo, around 1269. The election was taking forever.
What did they do?
First, the city officials cut the cardinals' food supply down to just bread and water.
Harsh.
And when that didn't work, they apparently took the roof off the papal palace where the cardinals were meeting.
They took the roof off.
Exposed them to the elements to encourage a decision.
That is unbelievable. Talk about motivation.
Exactly. And it was these kinds of situations, these extreme delays, that led directly to Gregory X's Ubi Periculum rules, the lock-in, the food rations, even docking their pay.
Right. Connecting the dots now.
Yeah. And even though those rules were debated and sometimes suspended, they show the constant push to find a balance. Over time, procedures got more refined, the location settled mostly on Rome, and since 1878, it's been the Sistine Chapel.
Okay, so that brings us more towards the modern era. How does all that history shape what happens today?
A lot of it is still there, foundationally, but there are modern adaptations. Since 2005, for example, the cardinal electors stay in the Domus Sanctae Marthae during the conclave.
That's the residence inside the Vatican.
Yes, provides more comfortable lodging than, say, temporary cells set up in the Apostolic Palace, like in the past. The main rulebook now is that 1996 Constitution from John Paul II, Universi Dominici Egregius.
Okay.
Benedict XVI made a few tweaks, but that's basically the governing document. It replaced older ones, but kept a lot of the traditional procedures.
And the Dean of the College of Cardinals, she has a special role, right?
He does. The dean, who's always a cardinal bishop, has several key duties during the Sancta Vacante, the time the papacy is vacant.
Like what?
He officially verifies the Pope's death, calls the College of Cardinals together, and importantly, if the new Pope isn't already a bishop, the dean usually performs the consecration.
Okay. What if the dean is over 80 and can't vote or can't perform the consecration?
Then the vice dean steps in, or if he's also unable, the most senior cardinal bishop who is present and eligible takes over those duties.
Got it. Now, we've talked a lot about the cardinals being the only electors. Has anyone ever seriously proposed changing that, maybe involving more people?
There have been discussions, yeah. People have floated ideas like involving the Synod of Bishops, which is a broader group.
Yeah.
But Universi Dominici Egregius is really explicit on this. It says, even if a synod or a big church council is happening when the Pope dies, it stops immediately. They have no authority to elect the Pope.
So it stays firmly with the College of Cardinals.
Yes. The document reinforces that tradition. It keeps the electing body defined and considerate.
And I guess there's always speculation about who might be elected. The papabile.
Always, though actual campaigning for the papacy is definitely frowned upon.
Right.
But yeah, the media, observers, everyone starts making lists of potential candidates, those seen as having a realistic chance. That's the papabile.
Okay, let's walk through the timeline now. A pope dies or resigns. What are the very first official steps?
The first thing is verification of death. That's the job of the Cardinal Camerlengo, the Chamberlain.
How do they verify?
Traditionally, it involved calling the Pope's baptismal name 3 times. Nowadays, it's more likely a medical verification, but the Camerlengo still has the crucial role. He also takes charge of the Pope's ring, the ring of the fisherman, and the papal seal.
And what happens to the ring and seal?
They're later ceremonially broken or defaced. Its symbolic marks the end of the pontificate and prevents any documents being forged during the vacancy.
Makes sense. And then begins the sede vacante period, right?
Yeah.
The time between popes.
Exactly. During sede vacante, the church's day-to-day governance passes in a limited way to the College of Cardinals as a whole. The dean calls them together.
What do they do in these meetings?
They hold general congregations, which all cardinals under 80 must attend if possible. They handle the big picture stuff. There are also particular congregations, just the Camerlengo and 3 assistants chosen by lot handling daily business and maintaining secrecy.
And they plan the funeral.
Yes, arranging the Pope's burial, usually within 4 to 6 days, during the 9-day mourning period called the Novum Dialis. Crucially, they also set the date for the conclave to begin.
When does the conclave usually start?
Normally between 15 and 20 days after the Pope's death. Gives time for cardinals to travel to Rome from all over the world.
Okay. And what if it's a resignation, like Benedict XVI? How does that change things?
Resignation is rare, obviously. Benedict's in 2013 was the first since 1415, but John Paul II actually planned for it in Universi Dominici Gradus.
He did.
Yeah, the rules basically kick in just the same. The vacancy starts at the moment the resignation takes effect. The fisherman's ring is handled similarly taken by the Camerlengo, but instead of being broken, it's marked with an X to cancel it.
Okay, so the process is largely the same. Then comes the time just before the conclave starts, before they're actually sealed in. What happens then?
There are 2 important sermons the cardinals hear. One before they enter the conclave proper, and one after they're inside the Sistine Chapel, but before voting starts.
What are the sermons about?
They're meant to set the stage, really, reflect on the state of the church, the challenges it faces, and the qualities needed in the next pope. Kind of a spiritual preparation.
And then the actual entry into the Sistine Chapel.
Yes. On the designated morning, there's a special mass in St. Peter's Basilica. Then, usually in the afternoon, the cardinal electors process solemnly into the Sistine Chapel.
Is there music?
Oh, yes. They chant the Litany of the Saints and the famous hymn Veni Creator Spiritus, Come Holy Spirit. It's very powerful, invoking divine guidance.
And then they take an oath.
A very solemn oath. Each cardinal elector takes it individually. The senior cardinal reads it out, and then each one in order of rank steps forward, places their hand on the Gospels, and repeats it.
What do they swear to?
To follow the conclave rules precisely, to defend the independence of the Holy See, to maintain absolute secrecy about everything that happens inside, and crucially, to reject any interference or advice from outside powers regarding their vote.
That sounds incredibly binding. Secrecy is key.
Absolutely paramount. And after that oath comes that famous command.
Extra alms.
Exactly. Everyone out. The master of papal liturgical celebrations gives the order. Anyone not a cardinal elector or specifically permitted to stay must leave. Then the doors are closed and locked.
Who does get to stay, besides the electors?
Well, the master of ceremony stays for a bit. And one designated cleric, usually a theologian, stays to give one last spiritual reflection to the cardinals.
The second sermon you mentioned.
Right. He speaks about the church's needs and the qualities the new pope should have, and then he leaves too. After some prayers, the senior cardinal asks if there are any last questions about procedure.
Can cardinals arrive late or leave if they get sick?
Yes, latecomers are admitted. And if a cardinal gets genuinely sick and needs to leave, they can, and they can return if they recover. Same if they just need the restroom briefly. But if someone leaves for any other non-medical reason, they can't come back.
So once you're in, you're pretty much in. What about staff inside? Cooks, cleaners?
It's very restricted now compared to the past. If a cardinal is really ill, they might be allowed a nurse. Otherwise, the permitted personnel include the secretary of the college, masters of ceremonies, some clergy for liturgical roles, confessors, doctors, and a very limited number of service staff for essential needs like food and cleaning.
And the secrecy rules are super strict, right? No phones, no internet.
Absolutely zero communication with the outside world.
Yeah.
No phones, no email, no letters, no signaling. Any attempt to communicate or even eavesdrop using technical devices results in automatic excommunication.
Excommunication, that's serious.
It shows how vital they consider the integrity and independence of the process. There are tiny exceptions for the major penitentiary and the vicars for Rome and Vatican City, but only for really urgent official business, and only with permission from the college.
And they actually check for bugs,
Look,
like listening devices?
they do. The source mentions the Sistine Chapel and surrounding areas are thoroughly swept for bugs before the conclave. They block Wi-Fi, use signal jammers, basically create a secure bubble.
Yeah.
No newspapers, no radio, no TV allowed inside either.
Wow. Okay, so they're sealed in, sworn to secrecy, totally cut off.
Yeah.
Now, the main event, the voting. How did the ballots work today?
They're pretty simple rectangular cards. Printed at the top is the Latin phrase "Eligo in Summum Pontificem."
I elect a supreme pontiff.
Exactly. Below that is space for the elector to write the name of the person they're voting for. Each cardinal gets a few of these, plus other documents explaining the process.
And how often do they vote?
On the first afternoon, they might hold just one ballot. After that, the standard schedule is 2 ballots in the morning session and 2 in the afternoon session. So up to 4 votes per day.
And they take that oath again.
They reaffirm their oath before the morning session and before the afternoon session each day.
What happens if no one gets elected after a few days?
There's a built-in pause system. If no pope is chosen after 3 days of voting, they pause for a maximum of 1 day for prayer, reflection, and an address from the senior cardinal deacon.
Okay.
Then they resume voting. If they still don't have a pope after another 7 ballots, another pause, this time with an address from the senior cardinal priest.
And again after another 7.
Yes, a third pause if needed, with the senior cardinal bishop speaking. If after all that they're still deadlocked, there's another pause for prayer. Then the process shifts.
How does it shift?
They move to a runoff election between the 2 cardinals who received the highest number of votes in the very last ballot.
Just those 2.
Just those 2. But crucially, a 2/3 majority is still required to elect one of them. And the 2 candidates in the runoff, they don't get to vote in that specific ballot.
Interesting. So it forces a choice, but maintains the high threshold. Now, take us through the actual mechanics of a single vote. You mentioned 3 phases.
Right. Pre-scrutiny, scrutiny, and post-scrutiny.
Okay, pre-scrutiny.
This is the setup. Masters of ceremonies distribute the ballot papers. Then, everyone who isn't an elector leaves the secretary, the masters of ceremonies. The junior cardinal deacon then locks the door from the inside.
And then?
Then, the junior deacon draws 9 names by lot from among the electors.
9 names. For what?
3 become the scrutineers, they count the votes. 3 are the infirmari, they collect votes from any sick cardinals who can't come to the chapel. And 3 are revisers, they double-check the scrutineers' count.
And these roles change.
Yes, they draw new names for the afternoon session.
Okay, so the stage is set.
Huh.
Then comes the scrutiny phase, the actual voting.
Exactly. Each cardinal elector, in order of seniority, walks up to the altar where a large chalice or urn is placed. They hold up their folded ballot so it can be seen, recite that Latin oath aloud.
The oath again?
Yes. Tester Christum Dominum, qui me iudicaturus effe eligere, quem secundum Deum iudico eligidibere.
Which means?
I call as my witness Christ the Lord, who will be my judge, that my vote is given to the one who before God I think should be elected.
Powerful words.
Very. Then they place the ballot on a plate and use the plate to tip it into the urn.
What about sick cardinals, the infirmari?
Right. If a cardinal is sick but still in the chapel, an infirmarius goes to them. If they're confined to their room in the Domus Sancti Marthae, the 3 infirmari go together with a locked box and blank ballots. The sick cardinal writes their vote, takes the oath, folds the ballot, and puts it in the box. The infirmari bring the box back, unopened, and it's open in the chapel, and those ballots are counted with the others.
Okay, so everyone's vote gets counted. What happens once all the ballots are in the urn?
The first scrutineer shakes the urn several times to mix the ballots. Then the last scrutineer takes them out one by one and counts them.
Just counts them.
Counts to make sure the number of ballots matches the number of electors present. If it doesn't match, maybe someone put in 2 or forgot, all the ballots are burned immediately, no result announced, and they have to vote again.
A check for irregularities.
Exactly. If the number does match, then the actual counting of names begins. The first scrutineer unfolds a ballot, notes the name silently, passes it to the second scrutineer, who also notes the name, then passes it to the third.
And the third one?
The third scrutineer reads the name written on the ballot aloud, so all the electors can hear it and keep their own tally if they wish.
Okay, so they go through all the ballots like that?
Yeah.
Then the post-scrutiny phase.
Right. After all names are read out, the scrutineers add up the votes received by each candidate. They check their totals against each other. Then the three revisers take over.
What do the revisers do?
They meticulously check the ballots and the scrutineers' tally sheets to make absolutely sure the count is accurate and no errors were made. It's a final verification.
Double-checking everything.
Precisely. Once the revisers confirm the count, the process for that ballot is complete. And unless someone has been elected...
The ballots get burned.
Yes. The scrutineers, helped by the secretary and a masters of ceremonies, who are readmitted for this, gather all the ballots and tally sheets and burn them in a special stove installed in the chapel.
And this burning creates the smoke signal, the fumata.
Exactly. This is the tradition everyone watches for. Black smoke fumata nera means no pope was elected in that voting session.
And white smoke.
White smoke fumata bianca means a new pope has been elected and has accepted.
How do they make sure the smoke is the right color? I heard there used to be confusion.
There definitely was sometimes, especially in 1958. Historically, they sometimes added wet straw to get black smoke. But since 1963, they've used chemical additives to make it really clear.
Chemicals? What kind?
The Vatican actually revealed them in 2013. For black smoke, it's potassium perchlorate, anthracene, and sulfur. For white smoke, it's potassium chlorate, lactose, and rosin like pine rosin.
Wow, specific recipes.
Ensures there's no ambiguity. And since 2005, they also ring the bells of St. Peter's when the white smoke goes up, just to be extra sure.
White smoke and bells.
Got it.
So the white smoke appears. A pope has been elected. What happens inside the chapel in those first moments?
It's a hugely significant moment. The Cardinal Dean, along with the Secretary of the College and the Master of Liturgical Celebrations, approaches the Cardinal who received the 2/3 majority.
And asks him.
He asks him two crucial questions in Latin. First, acceptas ne electionem de te canonite factum in summum pontificem.
Do you accept your canonical election as Supreme Pontiff?
Precisely. The elect is completely free to say no, though it's very rare. Usually, if someone felt they couldn't accept, they'd signal that somehow earlier.
Presuming he accepts.
Yeah.
What's the second question?
The dean then asks, quo nomine vis vocari?
By what name do you wish to be called?
Right. This is when the new pope chooses his papal name. A tradition dating back quite a ways. John II in the 6th century was the first to take a new name. Marcellus II in the 16th century was the last to keep his baptismal name.
Once he accepts and chooses a name, is he officially pope?
If he's already a bishop, yes. The moment he accepts, he receives full papal authority. If he's not a bishop, say, just a priest, or theoretically even a layman, he becomes pope only after he's ordained a bishop.
And the dean would ordain him right there?
Usually the dean, yes. Or the vice dean or senior cardinal bishop, if needed. If a layman were elected, he'd need to be ordained deacon, then priest, then bishop. But again, that's highly theoretical now.
Okay. So he accepts, chooses a name. What happens next?
The Master of Liturgical Celebrations formally records the acceptance in the new name. Then the other cardinals approach the new pope one by one to offer their respects and pledge their obedience.
You mentioned a tradition with the pope's skull cap, the zucchetto.
Yes. It's not always done, but sometimes the new pope takes off his cardinal's red zucchetto and places it on the head of the secretary of the conclave. It's seen as a sign that the secretary will likely be made a cardinal himself soon. Pope Francis did this in 2013.
A nice symbolic gesture. And then the new pope gets dressed.
Yes, he goes to a small room off the Sistine Chapel, often called the Room of Tears, presumably because of the emotion of the moment.
Room of Tears, wow.
There, several sizes of papal robes are waiting, the white cassock, the white lace rochet over it, and sometimes the red mazzetta, a short cape. He puts those on, along with the pectoral cross and the white papal zucchetto.
Ready to meet the world.
Almost. First comes the announcement. The cardinal protodeacon, the senior cardinal deacon, goes out onto the central balcony of St. Peter's Basilica.
The famous balcony.
That's the one. And he makes the announcement the crowds have been waiting for, using the traditional Latin formula.
Habemus papam.
Annuntio vobis gaudium magnum habemus papam. I announce to you a great joy, we have a pope. Then he gives the new pope's birth name and surname, followed by the papal name he has chosen.
Do they ever add anything else?
Sometimes. When Benedict XVI was elected, the protodeacon, Cardinal Medina, gave a brief greeting in several languages before the Latin. That didn't happen for Francis. Also, historically, if the protodeacon himself got elected, the next senior deacon would make the announcement.
Okay. And after the announcement?
A large banner or tapestry, often with the coat of arms of the previous pope, is unfurled on the basilical railing, the pontifical anthem is played, and then the new pope himself steps out onto the balcony.
The first appearance must be an incredible moment.
Absolutely. He then gives his first blessing, the Urbi et Orbi, to the city of Rome and to the world.
Does he speak before the blessing?
It's become a bit of a recent tradition. The last three popes, John Paul II, Benedict, and Francis, all said a few words to the crowd first. Pope Francis famously asked the crowd to pray for him before he gave the blessing, and prayed for his predecessor, Benedict.
And that marks the public beginning of his papacy. Is there a coronation anymore?
No, the formal coronation ceremony with the three-tiered tiara, the triregnum, hasn't been used since Paul VI. John Paul I opted for a simpler papal inauguration mass, and that's been the practice ever since.
It's just an incredible journey we've traced. From those early, almost informal choices, through centuries of political intrigue, roof removals, chemical smoke signals, to this very precise, solemn, modern process.
It really is an amazing blend of ancient tradition and necessary adaptation, isn't it? All focused on this single, hugely consequential decision for the Catholic Church and, in many ways, for the world.
Absolutely. This deep dive, starting from that Wikipedia entry you shared, has been so illuminating. It gives so much context to the rituals and procedures we're likely to see unfolding soon.
Hopefully, yeah. You really get a sense now of the weight behind the white smoke, the habemus papam, all of it. It's not just ceremony. It's the culmination of a very long, very carefully constructed process.
It really is. And it leaves you thinking, doesn't it? Like, how much does this whole evolution reflect the church's changing place in the world, its relationship with power?
That's a great question. Or, even with all these incredibly detailed rules and procedures, where does the human element end and the sense of divine guidance begin in making that final choice? How do the cardinals themselves see that balance?
Exactly. Definitely food for thought. For anyone listening who's as fascinated as we are, digging into some of those specific papal documents we mentioned or reading about particular historical conclaves, there's just so much more rich history there.
Absolutely. It's a story that continues to unfold.